Well, good afternoon, thanks for coming. My name is Richard Lister, I work for Sunderland City Council. I'm a housing officer, private rented sector. I deal with our landlord accreditation scheme, which has a group of landlords who are dedicated with good professionalism, and we make sure that they have a good standards before we refer any tenants to them. Today we're going to go over a tenancy rights workshop. I've got a background in deliver tenancy training, and today we're just going to discuss general things around tenancy issues for students. So what we'll look at today basically is your rights and responsibilities as a tenant. So whether you're moving into the private rented sector, which is the main part of this, or if you're in halls at the minute. There's different types of tenancy available to people in the private rented sector. Damp and mould, how to spot it, the differences, the issues that it causes. Maintenance, and when things go wrong. And dealing with issues in shared housing, which is obviously a massive aspect of student living. So first of all, different types of tenancy. The most prevalent one you'll find if you're moving out into the private sector will be an assured short hold tenancy. That usually lasts about 6 to 12 months. Most private landlords use these in the sector. But there's certain rules they have to follow in terms of this. Your landlord must protect your deposit in a government approved scheme once you've paid it. You can't be evicted within the fixed term unless you break the tenancy agreement. At the end of your fixed term, you must be given at least 2 months notice to leave. And your landlord must serve what they call a Section 21 notice, and they have to get a court order and bailiffs to get you out that way. So you're quite protected in this tenancy. It's the most protected tenancy you'll have as a tenant. You do have some control over your property as well, as the landlord must give you notice for inspection or repair of these ones. A periodic tenancy, so this can happen in certain different ways. Usually what happens is after the end of your fixed term of an assured short hold tenancy, you don't sign a new one, it just carries over. Happened a lot to me when I was a student. You're still protected by the same terms of that agreement, you just haven't signed a new one, but it's called a periodic tenancy. There's different options that can happen at the end of that fixed term. Is you can obviously give up the tenancy and move somewhere else. The landlord and tenant can agree to a new fixed term tenancy, so you do write a new tenancy for another year, or like I said, it just rolls over. Some people call it a rolling tenancy. That's quite common as well. But the important thing to note is you're still protected by those same rights, as it were. For example, if the landlord wants to evict you from the tenancy, they still have to go through the same process using a Section 21 notice. That process itself, if it ever happens, can take up to 6 to 8 months, so it's quite a laborious process. So a joint tenancy, a very common tenancy again for students. When I was a student, this is basically what I had most of the time, for a good 2 years actually. So if you have a joint tenancy, if you and your housemates have all signed a single tenancy agreement, so say there's 5 of you moving to property, you've all signed one agreement, that's a joint tenancy. So you're all jointly and individually responsible for paying the rent and keeping to that tenancy agreement that you've signed. All 5 of you, not just one person, all 5 of you. So if one tenant is not paying the share, for example, the other tenants are responsible for paying the rest of that rent. If they don't, you could be evicted. Could be, it's certainly a possibility. The landlord can ask any one of them to pay the full amount or take them to court, any person on that tenancy agreement. So if you have to say, again, there's 5 of you and 3 of you just decide you're going off to do something else, you've sacrificed that tenancy for whatever reason, you can still be held liable under that fixed term agreement. So it's very careful if you are getting out of that agreement that you're obviously signing a new agreement with whoever flatmates you've got coming in. The landlord can deduct an amount from the total deposit if one tenant doesn't pay their share of rent or if they damage the property. That happened to me. There was actually 5 of us in a property. One flatmate wasn't keeping up with the rent, so we just said, can you just take it out of their share of the deposit? The landlord was happy to do it that way. It just depends on your landlord in that respect. A separate shared tenancy is very similar to a shared tenancy. The only difference is that you all signed individual tenancies. So 5 of you signed 5 different tenancies for 5 different bedrooms. And the only difference you have there is if your flatmate next to you doesn't pay the rent, it doesn't affect you. So some people prefer that as a more secure way of shared living, because as long as you're adhering to your tenancy agreement for that room, for example, you're covered, you're safe, and there's no shared responsibility with that. So tenancy agreements. So in the UK, well in England actually, you don't actually have to have a written tenancy agreement. It's not actually legal to have a written tenancy agreement. You can have a verbal one as well. So because it's just literally a contract between you and the landlord. But you still have to follow the rules set down. You can ask for in writing the basic protections that you have as a tenant, so they have to give you that. You can request that in writing, but usually 9 times out of 10 these days it is written down, and obviously I would advise that you do have a written tenancy agreement, because if there is any disagreements with the landlord about anything, you've got it in writing. So that goes without saying. And the tenancy can either be fixed term, which is set for a certain period of time, or periodic or running or rolling, which is what I mentioned earlier. So what pieces of information should you want to be looking for in a tenancy agreement when you're signing one? You want the address of the property, what you're paying rent for. This sounds quite like a no-brainer, but actually a lot of these things can be missed. The tenancy start date, when do you start paying rent from and to when? That gets missed up quite a lot, so it's something that you need to keep an eye on. The term of the tenancy, the rental amount, the payment date, what date are you paying that? How will the rent be reviewed? They can't push rent up in the fixed term. It's illegal for a landlord to raise rent during a fixed term, but they can review it at the end of the fixed term. So say if a year is up and you still want to stay there, they may want to review the rent. But it's always important to put that in the tenancy agreement. Obviously the deposit amount and how it will be protected. If it's an insured short-haul tenancy, the most common tenancy in the private sector, they will have to protect it by law. If they don't, they can award you 3 times the amount of the deposit. So they must protect it, they must give you that information about where it's protected. And they must have the landlord and tenant details on there, signatures as well. There you go. And in the agreements, in student halls there might be a break clause. I'm not sure how it works here, but there should be something in terms of a tenancy agreement about how it ends, or how you could end it. The tenant's obligations should be there, so you know as a tenant what you're responsible for, and also the landlord obligations too. Now your basic rights. If you're an assured short tenant renting from a private landlord, you have certain rights. You have other rights in different types of tenures too. So you have these rights even if you don't have a written tenancy agreement. So if you're worst case scenario, you get a tenancy agreement that's only verbal, you're still protected by these rights. It doesn't matter if it's written down or not, you are still protected as a tenant. The rights might not apply if your landlord lives at the same property as you, i.e. a lodger, which is if you have a lot. Well, basically, if you are a lodger, you have little rights whatsoever. It's the worst kind of security of tenure, as we call it. Security of tenure is basically how much rights you have. If you're a lodger or if you're living with somebody, you have little rights whatsoever. If your tenancy was started before 20th of February 1997, you won't have that problem. If your accommodation is provided with your job, there's different rights to those. But we're just going to concentrate on the main private sector ones at the minute. If you ask your landlord, they must put in writing some of the basic facts about your tenancy, like we just said about the tenancy agreement. The date started, the rent and any provision increasing it, and the length of your tenancy. They must give you that. You have a right to know who your landlord is. When I was a student, I was renting off an agent. I never met my landlord, but his name was always on the tenancy agreement. By law, you have to know who your landlord is. So they must tell you where you can write to them. If you pay your rent to a letting agent, they must give you the landlord's details if you ask for it. If they don't reply within 21 days, they're actually committing a criminal offence, and they can be fined up to £2,500. So you have a right to know who your landlord is. Deposit protection, we've covered that already with the insured short tenancy. Your landlord must protect your deposit in the government-approved scheme. There are 3 main deposits schemes that the government use: my deposits, the DPS, and the TDS. If they don't do this, the court can order the landlord to pay you compensation. Like I say, it's usually 3 times the amount. And it's also more difficult for your landlord to evict you if they haven't protected your deposit. So basically, if you moved into a property, you've signed the insured short tenancy, you've paid your deposit, and the landlord hasn't given you any kind of information about whether they've protected it. If it does go to court for eviction process, not saying it will, but if it does, they probably find it very difficult to evict you because they haven't proven that they protected your deposit. Your landlord only has to give you a rent book if you pay weekly. Usually it's monthly these days. If possible, pay your rent through a bank, post office, or by cheque, so you have a record of what you paid. Sounds obvious, I know, but a lot of people get caught in that trap of paying cash. I stupidly used to pay cash in my first year at uni for the first year outside of halls, and it was just a nightmare for the landlord to track. And then I realised, well, how am I supposed to prove that I've actually paid it? So again, it's a no-brainer. You should be doing that anyway. If you do pay cash, get receipts. You have a right to live in a safe home. In student halls, you'll have a right to repair, which is a basic legal right, which means that if there's any issues with certain things like water or heating, they need to be rectified in a certain frame of time. But that depends on, again, the provision of the university, the housing provision of the university. But in the private sector, you have a right to live in a safe home. Your landlord must arrange for any gas appliances and electrics to be safe. It will be the same for student accommodation provided by the university, because either they'll be part of a code or licensed from the, from the local council, sorry, depends on what setup they have. Your landlord must install a working smoke alarm on each floor of your home, and you must also install a carbon monoxide alarm in any room with a solid appliance or burner. Solid fuels obviously include coal and wood. The right to repair is mentioned in student accommodation. Your landlord is responsible for most repairs, including the boiler, heating, roof and windows. All externals covered by the landlord, as well as obviously heating and plumbing. You will be responsible for minor repairs like changing fuses and light bulbs. Again, that goes, you think that goes without saying, but a lot of people again have an impasse with the landlord saying they should be fixing that as well. Happens quite a lot actually in the private sector. If there is disrepair, inform the landlord straight away, preferably in writing. If you put it in writing, you've got a paper trail. A lot of people use WhatsApp these days. They'll contact WhatsApp or text message to their landlord. You've got some record there, as long as you're making sure you're saving that as well, just in case you lose your phone or anything. But any kind of paper trail is always good when it comes to disrepair, because you're proving that you've contacted the landlord and you've done the reasonable steps to report that repair to be fixed. You will also have to repair or pay for anything you have damaged. Again, that goes without saying. You have a right for peaceful enjoyment. So you basically, when you're renting a property, that's going to be treated as your home, principally your home. So you have a right to live in there without nuisance from your landlord. Your landlord should not let themselves into your home without your permission. You should also give notice if the landlord wishes to inspect the property. 24 hours is usually the main, but it could be 48. But some form of genuine notice has to be given before they inspect the property. If they keep doing that, that constitutes as harassment. And it is illegal for landlords and their representatives to harass you. So not just the landlord, if it's their gas safety inspector or whoever it is, an engineer, whoever it is illegal for them to harass you. And it happens quite a lot in the private renting sector. They just want to come around and fix something. Happens quite a lot in landlords who have sold their family home, are renting out their family home, and they're still treated like their family home. I had a couple of cases like that where they kept just dropping in by to say hello to the tenant, see how everything was, make sure the place was clean. They can't do that. They have to give notice. They have to give you some form of notice. And that's the same as student halls, because you're classed as a protected tenant. So you don't have as much full rights as you would do in the private rental sector under short tenancy, but you still have some protections. Access to your home. So you have a right to decide who can come into your home. Your landlord does not have the right to enter your home without your permission. We've covered that. You must, however, allow reasonable access for inspections and repairs. A lot of organisations will check every year to make sure the gas safety is up to scratch, and also electric repairs. So they have to do that as part of their cyclical maintenance. So they will need access at some point. So if you're unreasonably allowing access to a landlord, it will probably come back on yourself saying, well, we've tried to get into that property and they're not letting us in. And then social tenancies, council tenancies, by law they have to do it every year, and they can actually evict people if they don't let them in. But that's obviously an extreme example. Protection from illegal eviction. So you have the right to remain in your home. You're paying rent to remain in a home, so you've got those rights. Your landlord can only evict you by serving the correct legal notice and then getting a possession order from the court. Even in student halls, it'll be the same. It won't be as a laborious process as a private sector, but they'll still have to get some form of eviction notice to evict people from student accommodation. Even then, you have a right to stay until the bailiffs come with a warrant to evict you. A lot of my time working in the homeless sector, a lot of people would leave a property straight away as soon as they got an eviction notice and say, I'm homeless, can you come help us? The first thing we'll say is, well, you could actually stay in that property. You could stay in that property for months, and we could help build a case and work with you on that. Legally, you can still stay there. And that's a big misconception, especially in the private rental sector, is when an eviction notice is issued, people just say, right, okay, I'm moving out now. And that's not the case. If it does happen to anyone, the first thing we'll say is seek advice, seek help, absolutely. And don't just react really quickly and say, right, I'm getting evicted, I need to move out now, I need to find somewhere to live. Because 9 times out of 10, you can either fight the case or you have a reason to stay there, or you're protected by some form of right. Your tenancy agreement should say how and when the rent will be reviewed, like we've already covered. For a fixed term tenancy, your landlord can only increase the rent if you agree. For a periodic tenancy, that's when your tenancy finishes and it just keeps on rolling. They cannot normally increase the rent more than once a year. And the rent increase must be fair and realistic and in line with average local rents. So if next door's flat the same size is on the market for 500 per month, they can't say, well, I'm going to up mine to 800. They can't do that because that's an unfair rental rise. So your responsibility. So as a tenant, obviously you have your own responsibilities. When you're signing a tenancy agreement, you're saying, I will do this, the landlord will do this, I will do this as a tenant. So obviously the first one, the no-brainer, you must pay your rent. It goes without saying. Or I would advise, a lot of people said to me, oh, I'm going to refuse my rent out of protest for disrepair. I wouldn't recommend doing that at all. I've done it before myself with a rogue landlord I had once. You're leaving yourself wide open for eviction, because if you do not pay your rent, they have a faster eviction route and you don't have as many rights. So just pay your rent and make sure you're reporting those repairs. Because if you do withdraw your rent for any reason, actually you're leaving yourself wide open for an eviction. You must obviously take care of the property, keep it in good, clean condition, and must promptly report any repairs required to the property. Antisocial behaviour. You must not do anything which will reasonably be considered nuisance or annoyance to any neighbours. And that includes guests that you have. You can be the best behaved tenant in the world, and you can have someone over and they misbehave and cause criminal damage or whatever it is. You're ultimately responsible for them. And I've seen some cases where people have been through the eviction process because of what their friends did, nothing what they did. You must give the landlord access to the property at reasonable times for inspection or repair purposes, but again, you have the right to say no. You must give the landlord immediate access to the property in the event of emergency. Obviously, if there's a gas leak, gas mains, water leak, things like that, you must give them access there. Obviously, inventories are a big thing when you're looking at a property moving in. So at the start of the tenancy, the landlord or letting agent should draw up an inventory that records the condition of the property. The inventory can help avoid any dispute over the return of your deposit. It details the start of the property when you moved in, so the state of the property when you moved in at the start. It should provide an overview of the whole property and a list of its contents with detailed information like the conditions of the walls, ceiling, floors, windows and carpets, paintwork, curtains, furniture, appliances, condition of the smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, gas, electricity meter readings as well. So it's quite a comprehensive list of what state the property is in. And when you move out, they'll do another one and it should match that. Anything that doesn't match that, if it's worse, that's when they start looking at taking money off your deposit. And that's where all the impasses begin and all the complications begin. But if you have a copy of the inventory and you've signed it, they can't come back and see anything different. And then make sure when they're doing it that you're there, that you're actually witnessing with them. A lot of landlords will just do it and say, can you sign that? I would actually advise you to say, no, can I go around with you and do it now? That's the best way of doing it. Just a little story. When I rented a house, my landlord was great. He was a really, really good landlord, really fantastic. And we were moving out, and then he refused to give me my deposit back. So I contacted the agent to say, well, why isn't he giving my deposit back? And he was like, well, he said the oven was disgusting. The oven was, I had to get it cleaned. I said, well, that's weird because that oven was in better condition when I moved in. Because I cleaned it out when I moved in. I remember how disgusting it was. They said there was staining all over the whole carpets. I was like, because it was cream coloured. And I was like, well, that's interesting because when I left, there was nothing there. I handed the keys to your wife, who's the co-landlord, and I asked her if everything was okay. I didn't sign an inventory. And she said, yes, everything's fine. So when I left that property, to my opinion, it was in a good, reasonable standard. And now you've withheld my deposit without telling me 6 weeks later. She says, well, I've taken off what I need for the cleaning. I said, well, where's your inventory? Show me your inventory and show us your bills, and I'll pay for it. And he said, oh, I'll just have your deposit back. So Clea was just pulling a fast one. I managed to call his bluff on that, but I didn't have an inventory at that point. That was interesting because I knew he had the paint and decorators in the week after I moved out because my mate still lived next door. So they told me. So that's where it came from. But just to be a note of caution is have an inventory, have a signed inventory, make sure you're logging everything that way. And it also pays when you're reporting repairs in the term of your tenancy just to keep a record, just keep a file there. Because if anything comes back, anything gets broken, and then when you move out, they could say, well, you have to pay for that. And then having any kind of record or any of all of that will just keep that in place and stop you from being charged for money to getting taken off your deposit. Because they do try and pull a fast one. It does happen quite a lot. paper trail is always important. Always emphasise on a paper trail. Paper trail is massively important. And I've just covered that. Check your inventory. Amend it. Don't be afraid to say I disagree with you. Actually, no. That the crack in the sink is 6 inches, not 2. So can you please amend that, please? Don't be afraid to do that, because at the end of the day, when it comes to you leaving, you could be losing out on quite a lot of money. Keep a copy, like I said, and keep reports and keep your records. So I've covered all that. When you move, check it, like I said. Make sure any disagreements are recorded as well, proof of damage. Again, only sign it if you're happy. Your landlord shouldn't make any deductions for normal wear and tear. Normal wear and tear is the one thing which always causes an issue with tenants and landlords. And if they have to replace something, they have to replace like for like. So it's a B&Q sink, they have to replace it with a B&Q sink, not like a Royal Dalton sink, and then charge you for it. It doesn't work like that. They have to have a like for like replacement. Wear and tear is always the biggest complaint of what would you class as wear and tear, and that's the biggest argument. I recently went to a presentation by a team that actually deal with the mediation, and they had some great examples. And the best example I think they gave was there was like a sink with a crack in it, and the tenant had lived there for 7 years, and the crack was now double the size. The landlord was trying to say, "You've ruined that sink, I need a new sink." And they said, "Hang on a second, it was already cracked when they moved in. You did the inventory, they signed the inventory, everything else, and that's growing. That's going to happen over time. That's just when normal wear and tear. You can't say they've damaged that sink on purpose. That's going to happen over time. So unfortunately, we're not going to pay out to you because of that." So it does pay dividends doing that. And as a tenant, you have to understand your maintenance responsibilities. Yes, the landlord has to fix any of the major damage that happens, but you also have some responsibilities as a tenant under maintenance. So, for example, if your gas boiler goes, what do? A lot of people say, "Oh, I'll ring the landlord." Yes, you ring the landlord. The first thing you do is make sure it's on, make sure the fuse is working. It could be low pressure. If you haven't got a manual, Google it. There's all the manuals are online. Just to make sure, so when you're ringing that landlord up, you say, "Look, I've checked the fuse, I've checked the pressure, it's not that, can you send the engineer out?" So a lot of things that happen is they ring straight away. The engineer comes out, charges the landlord, there's no problem, you've accidentally knocked off the fuse with your elbow or something like that. And that causes a lot of issues between tenants and landlords. Like I say, check your thermostat, check your gas supply, make sure you haven't been cut off. Obviously ring the landlord if it still isn't working. Gas leak, again, what we advise is open your windows, no naked flames, turn off the gas. Make sure when you're moving into a property you know where the gas shut-off valve is and the stopcock is for the water. People just forget about that, and if you come to an emergency, where is it? And running around the house trying to find it. The two things you should look for as soon as you move in. And obviously ring an emergency number and get out. And then let the landlord know, obviously, once that happens. But your obviously safety is paramount in that situation. With a leaking water pipe, turn off the stopcock. Like I said, it's good to find it as soon as you move in, so you know how to shut that water off. Depends on the leak. If it's a small leak, yeah, great. If it's a big leak, it's going to cause a lot of damage. Turn off your boiler if you can. Drain the water by turning on all the taps so all the water comes out, so there's nothing stuck in the pipes. And obviously if you've got neighbours or if you're in a block of flats, make sure you let them know, because it could start penetrating into their properties as well. And if you can, turn off the electrics if necessary. And obviously make sure you call the landlord, make sure they get that fixed straight away. Cold radiators, this is quite a big issue as well. Say, "Oh, my radiators aren't working," ring the landlord. No, it's just a case of get a radiator key, turn it, bring the pressure up, bleed your radiator, and you'll save a lot more money if you do that more often, because obviously you're paying less for your gas and electricity. But that's a common one as well. They get a call out, they come in, the radiator isn't working, the heating's not working, it's not, you just need to bleed your radiators. Blocked toilets, again, you'll be surprised. Again, it's a no-brainer. We get a lot of calls to landlords saying, "Can you come in and block my toilet?" It's not their responsibility to unblock your toilet, it's yourself. Try using a plunger, get it done. Or I always say, whoever blocked the toilet, get them to unblock it. And with a missing roof slate, what we say is, don't fix it yourself. That is your landlord's responsibility. You have no responsibility around things like roofs, anything external like that. Do not try and fix it yourself and say, "Yep, I'll fix the roof for your landlord, can you charge us?" Some people have. Don't do that. It's their responsibility. They need to fix it. Do not put yourself in any kind of harm or danger by trying to fix it yourself. Call a landlord. Tenancy problems, covered that quite a lot in this session. And what causes those tenancy problems? But if your relationship with your landlord isn't very good, what would you do to resolve things? Talk to them is what we always kind of encourage, is just talk to the landlord first. Make sure you understand each other. Make sure you're on the same level, or make sure you attempted the conversation. If you come across as a reasonable person, it's going to go in your favour. I've tried contacting the landlord, he's not talking to me. Tried text him, he's not talking to me. Tried email, no response. At least you've done that, you've tried to do the decent thing first. If you think it will help, ask someone to mediate. Friend, relative, a support worker, or anybody, student union rep or something like that. Get them to come, to get them to try and intervene and have that third party. They might have a more of a kind of cool, collected kind of approach to it. And be prepared to apologise if you think you're in the wrong, because a lot of people don't, and that keeps it bubbling under, and that keeps that relationship in a poor kind of cycle. But just say, yeah, sorry landlord, I got it wrong this time, do apologise, and then get on with that professional relationship. Disrepair issues, one of the biggest, obviously biggest impasses that you have between tenants and landlords, So if you verbally report a repair to your landlord and they refuse to do it, what would you do next? So you went to the landlord and said, right, the roof's broken, what are you going to do about it? It's your responsibility to fix it, I know it is, what's going to happen? Next thing you should do is write your landlord formally, asking for the repairs to be done. You can do it old school via letter or email or something, as long as you've got something in writing that you've got a copy of yourself that you can use, that'll be your next step. And if they're constantly not fulfilling their obligations on repair, contact like a local council, i.e. Sunderland Council, ask for advice. Environmental health might be able to intervene or serve something on the landlord to make sure that they actually fix that problem. But like I said, keep any evidence of letters, you send them photographs of disrepair, keep everything, all the evidence you have, because it will work in your favour. And if you want to, you can get advice about taking your landlord to court. As a tenant, you can take the landlord to court if you believe the property is not fit for habitation. You'll need your own representation, of course, but you can legally take the landlord to court over that. So these are scenarios I've actually encountered myself, so I'm just going to talk you through them. So you decide to take a property on, and the landlord wants you to sign a tenancy agreement. You viewed the property, you've seen the property, you're happy with it apart from one thing. The boiler doesn't work. But the landlord says, oh, don't worry, it'll be fixed before you move in. It'll be fixed before you move in. So what would you do? Well, don't sign until you're sure you'll get it fixed. Get that assurance first. So when's it going to be fixed by? Have you got a scheduled work coming in? Is it going to be done by this date? I'd rather start paying rent from that date when there's a boiler in place. And if the landlord wants you in, as a tenant, they'll do it. Ask for written assurance, it'll get fixed as well, and request a date. Like I say, discuss changing the move-in date. Do not move in and expect it to be fixed, because it happens quite a lot. Something will happen and you're moving in, especially in the winter time, you haven't got a boiler, no hot water, no heating, and you've already signed a tenancy agreement to that effect, you're going to stay there for a year and pay rent for it. Have you done an inventory? Did you do inventory when you viewed the property? Do they have a valid gas safety certificate? Because they have to give you one as you move in. If you're not sure, seek advice. Citizens' advice are always good for offering you advice and things like that. Another scenario, you've been in a property for 6 months and you're in a 1-year assured short tenancy. You've been struggling to maintain the property as you found it really expensive to live there. You didn't realise it was that expensive. But you found another property with friends that's cheaper, and you can move in straight away without any upfront costs. So great, I can move in straight away, there's no deposit needed paid, it's all done, move it into someone else's room, I know I can actually afford to live there. What would you do? Well, the key is that you're 6 months into a 1-year assured short tenancy. The problem you've got is you're bound by your tenancy agreement for another 6 months. So if your landlord wanted to, he can still charge you 6 months rent. And that's the situation you don't want to be in. But check your tenancy agreement for any notice period you might have to give. Usually it's in there. Can I give you 4 weeks notice before moving in? Yeah, that's not a problem. But what I advise is you talk to your landlord first, because you might just be able to negotiate it. This happened to me when I bought my first house, still in my first house. I kept telling the landlord that I'm moving out, I'm looking for a house, I'm buying a house, it's going to take months to buy, but I'm moving out, so I'll just let you know. He's absolutely fine with it. And when it came to when I've actually bought the house, I said, look, I bought the house, I'm moving in 3 months. He says, well, you've got 8 months left of your tenancy agreement, I want 8 months. I said, well, I can't afford 8 months, because I'm buying a house. He says, like, well, tough, you've signed the contract, you're bound by it. And he was right. It wasn't a very nice thing to do, but he was right. But not all dampness in the property is caused by condensation. It's a structural issue. And the two most common types of dampness caused in structural issues are rising damp and penetrating damp. And like I said, this is your landlord's responsibility to sort it out. And damp can be really bad on your health. Really bad on your health. So rising damp is caused by groundwater moving up through a wall. Most walls and floors allow some water in, but it's usually stopped from causing damage by a barrier called a damp-proof course or a damp-proof membrane. If this is damaging your walls, your floor, you'll suffer from rising damp. Sorry. Rising damp can also happen if there's a lack of drainage on the level ground outside your home, or if it's higher than the damp-proof course on the wall, it gets in above it and gets into the brickwork. If you have rising damp, you may notice damaged skirting boards, or plaster, or peeling paint and wallpaper, wet patches, tide marks along the walls. I've got some examples in a second to show you. If the problem is coming up from the floor, you may also notice that the floor coverings is lifting and there's damp patches coming through. So there's some examples of rising damp in the corner there, coming through. Up there you've got the flaky paint and the dampness coming through there. From the outside you can see the staining. It's always a good first sign of rising damp. It's like even on a dry day you've got wet staining coming through there. You see that, you know when you've got rising damp. That causes major structural issues, and a lot of landlords are pretty reluctant to fix that because it's quite costly. Penetrating damp, quite simply, is when it leaks through a wall, it comes in through something. Again, there's a structural problem in the building, faulty guttering, roofing, cracks in the walls, which mean it's regularly getting soaked through. It can cause by internal leaks as well, such as pipes, doesn't have to come in from the outside. It often shows up through damp patches in the walls or ceilings, which darkens when it rains. You're more likely to get penetrating damp if you live in an older building with solid walls, as cavity walls provide some protection for that. And there's your sign there in the corner. Confusingly though, black mold growth from condensation can also cause that. But if you see wetness around it and when it rains it starts getting dark, you know it's penetrating damp. Again, on the left you can see where it's come through and they've tried to fix it, tried to paper over it. You've still got some lasting damage there. And on the outside, when you're viewing it properly and have a look, you can see it's rushing down outside there, so I've obviously got some cracked guttering there, which is causing some structural problems as well. And finally, I'm just going to cover a bit on shared housing, because I know obviously students have a lot of shared housing. Why people choose it, obviously it's cheaper. The main reason why a lot of students do it, the cost is shared. Companies living in shared housing, it's less lonely than living alone, plus you're living with a lot of like-minded people socially. Friendship, shared housing can lead to strong friendships. I'm still good mates of all my flatmates from uni. 20 years ago this year, scary, very scary. And safety, it's obviously safer living in shared housing as well. The disadvantages though, lack of privacy. One thing I don't miss about shared accommodation. You've never had any privacy at all, never get the house to yourself, especially when you've got shared cooking facilities. Loss of control, you have to make decisions collectively, which often leads to the problems around shared accommodation, and you've got to stick to house rules. Financial stress, again going back to joint tenancies, if you all sign that one tenancy you're all liable for that. If one housemate isn't paying their way, you've got to cover that cost. And fallouts happens all the time in shared accommodation. So dealing with problems with shared housing, again it seems like a no-brainer, but it's always good to cover. There's a lot of reasons why you might fall out with your housemates. Could be they're not paying their share of the bills, which is usually the most common. They're noisy, they don't like to do their household tasks, but we recommend some certain steps you can take if you start to experience that in shared housing. Find a solution to any problem with the people you live with and talking about the situation. Call a house meeting. Usually, I was very much against house meetings and rotas, but they did work when I was in shared accommodation. Have a word with your housemate politely and calmly, see if you can resolve the problem. So on a personal level, look, last night your music was really loud, can you just try and pipe it down because I'm working early in the morning? If it doesn't work, you're getting some hostility from them, whatever, they're not speaking to you. Like I said, house meeting is probably the best way to take it forward. Sit down with all your housemates in a house meeting, get that problem out in the open, discuss it as a collective. And other housemates might be having that same problem, they just haven't talked to you about it. Because people are coming in and out, you're all doing your own different thing. Sometimes you can go days without even seeing your flatmates. And number 3, if talking doesn't sort the problem out, ask your landlord for help. They might intervene for you. In some cases, you may be able to take action against the housemate, although you can't force them to do this. If you have separate shared tenancies, that's when you've signed your own tenancy for a shared accommodation, and they're not paying the rent. You can say to the landlord, look, that such and such isn't paying the rent. So, okay, they're bound by that tenancy agreement, I might have to ask them to leave. If it's, again, a shared tenancy, we've all signed the same tenancy, that's where it gets a bit more difficult. And negotiate with your landlord about that. A lot of the time, if there's one problematic tenant in a shared tenancy of 4 or 5, when it comes to renewing that tenancy, the landlord might just say, I'm not going to put that person in there, you find a different flatmate because they're too much hassle, as it were. But that's the third step. And what your landlord can do depends on, like I said, the joint or separate tenancies involved. And I've just basically covered that in that discussion, really. And bills is the biggest problem in shared accommodation. Causes friction all the time. If you don't pay bills, you could be evicted, have services disconnected, or be fined and taken to court. So it's very important that you have a system to make sure the bills are paid in full and on time. So it's up to you as a collective to decide what you're doing with that. The best option is just to have one separate account for the flat and have you all pay direct debit into that, then have no direct debits coming out of that. So if you're all paying collectively the water bills, obviously the rent comes out at the same time that way. Some people like to share, so one person take the utility bills, one person take this bill, one person take that bill, which is fine. But the problem that occurs is that if someone's away, goes away for the summer, goes on holiday, gets sick, whatever reason, leaves, they've got that responsibility. You need to bring that back into the collective and then rejig that. So I think that happened to me with the phone bill. Someone went away for 4 weeks in the summer and no one knew how to pay their phone bill because they were away and we couldn't contact them. So that can happen. So usually the best way is setting your own separate account for that flat so you can pay all your bills from it. And that's it for the day. I have questions I'll quickly answer that have been sent in to me, and then any questions, anyone feel any questions to me, I'm quite happy to answer. So what should you do if you ask your landlord a question and get no response? Well, I think we've covered that. Do it in writing, make sure you get in writing and follow it up. Report to the council, seek advice from citizen advice or the university around that. What should you do if your landlord promises to solve an issue and then doesn't? I think that's the same answer again. Paper trail is important, make sure you've got that paper trail and you're reporting that and that you've done whatever you can to report that issue, and then it's up to the landlord to fix it. If they haven't, that's when you start reporting them. What should I do if my landlord enters the property with no notice? Well, again, it will depend on your rights, but unless you're not living with your landlord, you have rights, you're protected. So, and that comes down to peaceful enjoyment we covered earlier. So you have a right for peaceful enjoyment, protection against harassment basically. They have to give you notice before coming to the property, and reasonable notice. They can't just give you 2 hours notice. So if they keep doing that, they're actually constituting harassment, and you can seek advice around that. But legally you could take them for harassment on that one if it's persistent. And where do I stand with getting my deposit back? Well, that's quite an open question because there's a lot of scenarios around that. But we covered that with the inventories and things. So, like I say, if it's an assured short-hold tenancy, you pay your deposit, and they should be giving it back unless there's any issues. They can't withhold your deposit for certain things. They can withhold it for rent arrears and damage. The things they can hold it for. They can't hold it for anything else. But they have to get it back within 2 weeks of leaving their property unless there's an issue to be resolved. If they have protected your deposit, that means that a third party holds it, so your landlord shouldn't be holding that money, someone else does. So again, it would depend on the situation around that, but if you've done your inventories, you've done your paperwork correctly, there's no argument you should be getting that within at least 2 weeks of getting that back pretty quick. And that's it. So contact details up there. If you ever want to just give me a call or drop me an email for anything, I'm quite happy to answer any questions that you have. I think I'm returning for a couple of weeks to sit down if anyone would like to access. You got a question?
Yeah. So one of our students is asking, where can international students without families in the UK refer to for a guarantor?
Whew, that's a good question. Guarantors, it's hard because where I've worked before, guarantors aren't worth the paper they're written on. It's really hard, but a lot of landlords ask for that.
Yeah.
It's really difficult for a guarantor because it usually is a family member. But obviously, an overseas student, that's going to be very difficult. I haven't got an answer for that, I'm afraid. It's very difficult. Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, I can't answer that one, I'm afraid.
Has anyone else got any other questions?
I've got issues with the maintenance team walking into the flat uninvited, not knocking, and when being asked to leave, being told, oh, it's fine, I'm only going to be a couple of minutes, and then not leaving and doing what they were going to do.
Right.
What can I do?
So, it's depending on obviously what agreement you've got, but if you're in a student accommodation, you protect the tenant, you have a right to repair, so they have to repair those in certain times. However, that would constitute as harassment, so it'd be a civil matter. You still have a right to say, you know, unless they're accessing the property for a safety check, which they need to do mandatory anyway. Obviously they shouldn't just be turning up. You should have some kind of form of notice for that. But that will depend on your agreement and what's written in your agreement, because if it's a student accommodation, it's set out a bit differently. But you should still be reporting that to the university accommodation, and say that's, you know, that behaviour would not be correct of a staff member.
What will you do if you have originally you've made complaints on many occasions and
So you've made complaints and it hasn't been rectified by your provider. Again, it depends on how the university accommodation is set up in terms of legally. If it's under a certain code, I don't know what Sunderland University has, but if it's under a certain code, or if it's under a licence from the local authority, then the local authority get involved, or whoever runs that code will get involved. Or you could seek advice. Citizens' advice would be a good place to go, because they've got a lot of advisors who look at student rights as well in terms of in student accommodation. Then we'll take the next step if you need to. Okay. Okay. Well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.